3/5 of the Senate duly chosen and sworn having voted in the affirmative, the motion is agreed to.
This is a very important day for our country.
It is not a great day. It's a great day for the big money interest, not a great day for working families.
We've demonstrated we can work together on a bipartisan basis.
I strongly disagree.
Our work on trade is not finished.
There you go, some of the back and forth over this trade bill. In a heated session, President Obama's bill cleared a Senate hurdle yesterday. A final vote on the House pass measure is expected at some point today. White House Press Secretary Josh Earnest says there is still more work to be done, and that's where we'll start this edition of the Roundtable. Please welcome in former Deputy Staff Secretary to President Bill Clinton and attorney David Goodfriend, also joining us as radio host and columnist for the Washington Times, Tim Constantine. Thank you both for being with us. David, let's start with you here. We saw the right come to President Obama's defense, not directly here, but helping save this trade agenda. Is this kind of a Clintonian, the fact where President Obama working very closely with the right to get something done?
Well, that's an interesting comparison, and I think a worthy one, because Clinton, of course, was known as the great triangulator who could forge a centrist path between conservatives and liberals. But I hesitate to really apply that label here, because my own view is that Democrat, Republican, progressive, conservatives, those are outdated labels when it comes to the current trade debate. You have Republicans who voted against this, you have Democrats who voted for it, and vice versa. You have odd bedfellows when it comes to the politics of trade right now, and I think there's a reason for that. I think the Republican presidential field is already saying things like, we need better wage growth, we have too much income inequality, we need more upward mobility. And at the same time, you're hearing similar themes stated by Hillary Clinton and some of the clips that you just played, Bernie Sanders. That populism, and I do think it's populism and it's appropriate, that populism is less about Democrat versus Republican and more about big corporations and big government and international government versus working class, everyday, ordinary Americans. I think that's the dichotomy we see playing out here. And frankly, you know, even though I'm a Clinton man, I tend to fall on the side of the Democrats who oppose this deal, because I really think that we've been able to see what happens to jobs in America under some of these agreements, and it ain't pretty.
Yeah,
and I think there's a lot of work that's left to be done here.
Well, we see that clip of Bernie Sanders there from the Senate floor, and I imagine it's the same thing he's using out in some of his stump speeches that have been very heavily attended by a lot of liberal Democrats. Tim, does this expose Hillary Clinton and force her to be kind of anti-Clintonian, ironically enough?
Yes. Well, I think that's right.
Hey, David, we'll get your take on the back end, but let's let Tim weigh in real quick on this.
Oh, sorry, I apologize.
I think it does. I think it does, in that what you've seen, this is one of several issues where different policies that were passed by Bill Clinton are not necessarily the same things that are being supported by Hillary Clinton. Now, they're two different people in two different times, so that shouldn't be that unusual. However, as far as the media is concerned, it is a terrible conflict. How could the Clinton administration of the 90s support topic A, in this case certain trade policies, and the Clinton would-be administration of 20 years later be completely different? It's a fair question. Maybe if she would answer some questions, she'd be able to clarify it for us.
That's a good point. I mean, she was not exactly clear in her position, basically telling Congress it's their job to fix it. But, David, let's get your take on this, because Bernie Sanders can go out there. He has opposed this crystal clear, but Hillary Clinton has kind of been equivocating a little bit in her answer.
Well, you'll be surprised to learn that I disagree that she's been equivocating. I think what she's been saying is, I can't read the text of this agreement, nor can anybody else outside the negotiators. Here are the tests I have for a good trade agreement, one that enhances job growth and wage growth in the United States.
But didn't she help negotiate some of these same policies?
When did she say that?
No. I'll tell you when she said that. You can go to her campaign website, HillaryClinton.com. You can go to her speeches after the.
So a staffer typed it up. She didn't actually say it. Okay, I got it.
This is what she said. She's put out a statement that says, "I don't support or oppose an agreement until I can see it." Now, the question that you just asked about whether or not she helped negotiate this, don't forget, it's been years since she left the State Department, and she does not have an up-to-date firsthand knowledge of what's in that agreement or what's being negotiated. And here's where I think it gets interesting, because even setting aside Hillary Clinton, there is going to come a time where there has to be an up or down vote in Congress. Now, it's not a supermajority in the Senate. It's a simple majority, 51 votes. But there will be a vote on whatever is negotiated. And that is the point at which we're going to hear the brass tacks specifics.
All right,
so here's something I predict. I predict you're going to see industry groups that heretofore have supported free trade that realize they got shafted in this deal coming out against it. And they'll join labor, and that will be interesting.
All right, guys, we're going to take a quick commercial break here. Coming up, also want to note that we are keeping an eye on the White House. President Obama expected to speak here momentarily about changes in hostage negotiation, a policy coming from the White House. Just announced a new executive order today. We are standing by. A live shot will be coming up here in just a few moments after this short commercial break. Again, President Obama outlining some changes to the way that the U.S. government deals with hostages, American hostages overseas. We're also coming back. We're going to talk about that and more with Tim Constantine and David Goodfriend right after this. And we welcome you back into Newsmax Now. We're going to turn it over to President Obama now, outlining completion of changes made to his hostage policy program. He's talking about that right now. Then we'll rejoin our roundtable right after this.
Never feel ignored or victimized by their own government. Diane Foley, whose son Jim was killed by ISIL last year, said, "As Americans, we can do better." I totally agree. We must do better. And that's why I ordered a comprehensive review of our hostage policy. I want to thank everybody who contributed to this review, inside and outside of government, some of whom are here today. I especially want to thank the former hostages and families who contributed. I've come to know some of these families, often under the most heartbreaking of circumstances. When her son Peter, also known as Abdul Rahman, was being held in Syria, his mother Paula Kasig wrote me a letter, and in it she described how on clear nights she and her husband would look up the stars and the moon and wonder if perhaps their son might be able to see them too, a reminder of the bond they might still share. I've called these families to offer our condolences after they've received gut-wrenching news no parents ever want to hear. I've visited with them. I've hugged them. I've grieved with them. I just spent time with some of the families as well as some former hostages here at the White House. And needless to say, it was a very emotional meeting. Some are still grieving. I thank them for sharing their experiences and their ideas with our review team. In fact, many of the changes we're announcing today are a direct result of their recommendations. I acknowledge to them in private what I want to say publicly, that it is true that there have been times where our government, regardless of good intentions, has let them down. I promised them that we can do better. Here's how. Today I'm formally issuing a new presidential policy directive to improve how we work to bring home American hostages and how we support their families. I've signed a new executive order to ensure our government is organized to do so. And we're releasing the final report of our review, which describes the 24 specific steps that we're taking. Broadly speaking, they fall into 3 areas. First, I'm updating our hostage policy. I'm making it clear that our top priority is the safe and rapid recovery of American hostages. And to do so, we will use all elements of our national power. I am reaffirming that the United States government will not make concessions, such as paying ransom, to terrorist groups holding American hostages. And I know this can be a subject of significant public debate. It's a difficult and emotional issue, especially for the families. As I said to the families who are gathered here today, and as I've said to families in the past, I look at this not just as a president, but also as a husband and a father. And if my family were at risk, obviously I would move heaven and earth to get those loved ones back. As president, I also have to consider our larger national security. I firmly believe that the United States government paying ransom to terrorists risks endangering more Americans and funding the very terrorism that we're trying to stop. And so I firmly believe that our policy ultimately puts fewer Americans at risk. At the same time, we are clarifying that our policy does not prevent communication with hostage takers by our government, the families of hostages, or third parties who help these families. And when appropriate, our government may assist these families and private efforts in those communications, in part to ensure the safety of family members and to make sure that they're not defrauded. So my message to these families were simple. We're not going to abandon you. We will stand by you. Second, we're making changes to ensure that our government is better organized around this mission. Every department that is involved in our national security apparatus cares deeply about these hostages, prioritizes them, and works really hard. But they're not always as well coordinated as they need to be. Under the National Security Council here at the White House, we're setting up a new hostage response group comprised of senior officials from across our government who will be responsible for ensuring that our hostage policies are consistent and coordinated and implemented rapidly and effectively. And they will be accountable at the highest levels. They'll be accountable to me. Soon I'll be designating as well a senior diplomat as my special presidential envoy for hostage affairs, who will be focused solely on leading our diplomatic efforts with other countries to bring our people home. At the operational level, we're creating for the first time one central hub where experts from across the government will work together side by side as one coordinated team to find American hostages and bring them home safely. In fact, this fusion cell located at the FBI is already up and running, and we're designating a new official in the intelligence community to be responsible for coordinating the collection, analysis, and rapid dissemination of intelligence related to American hostages so we can act on that intelligence quickly. Third, and running through all these efforts, we are fundamentally changing how our government works with families of hostages. Many of the families told us that they at times felt like an afterthought or a distraction, that too often the law enforcement or military and intelligence officials they were interacting with were begrudging in giving them information. And that ends today. I'm making it clear that these families are to be treated like what they are, our trusted partners and active partners in the recovery of their loved ones. We are all on the same team, and nobody cares more about bringing home these Americans than their own families, and we have to treat them as partners. So specifically, our new fusion cell will include a person dedicated to coordinating the support families get from the government. This coordinator will ensure that we communicate with families better, with one clear voice, and that families get information that is timely and accurate. Working with the intelligence community, we will be sharing more intelligence with families. And this coordinator will be the family's voice within government, making sure that when decisions are made about their loved ones, their concerns are front and center. Everyone who deals with these families on a regular basis will be given additional training to ensure families are treated with the dignity and compassion that they deserve. In particular, I want to point out that no family of an American hostage has ever been prosecuted for paying a ransom for the return of their loved ones. The last thing that we should ever do is to add to a family's pain with threats like that. So the bottom line is this. When it comes to how our government works to recover Americans held hostage and how we work with their families, we are changing how we do business. After everything they've endured, these families are right to be skeptical, and that's why it's so important, as I told them today, that we will be setting up mechanisms to ensure accountability and implementation. I've directed my national security team to report back to me, including getting feedback from the families, to make sure that these reforms are being put in place and that they are working. In the course of our review, several families told us they wanted to spare other families the frustrations they endured. Some have even created new organizations to support families like theirs or to honor their loved ones, such as the Memorial Foundation for Stephen Sotloff, who wrote, "Everyone has two lives. The second one begins when you realize you only have one." As a government and as a nation, we can learn from the example and the strength of their lives. the kind of strength we've seen in all these held hostages, including Kayla Mueller. Kayla devoted her life to serving those in need around the world. To refugees in Syria who had lost everything, she was a source of comfort and hope. Before her tragic death, she was held by ISIL in Syria for a year and a half, and during her captivity, Kayla managed to smuggle a letter to her family. She said, "None of us could have known it would be this long, but I know I'm also fighting from my side in the ways that I am able, and I have a lot of fight left in me. I'm not breaking down, and I will not give in no matter how long it takes." Today, my message to anyone who harms Americans is that we do not forget. Our reach is long. Justice will be done. My message to every American being held unjustly around the world who is fighting from the inside to survive another day, my message to their families who long to hold them once more, is that the United States of America will never stop working to reunite you with your family. We will not give up, no matter how long it takes. Thank you very much, everybody.
All right, there you have President Obama outlining changes to the U.S. hostage policy, specifically mentioning the fact that he was going to update the policy. There's 24 steps that they are going to take. Some of those include the way that these family members are treated. This, of course, comes after the family of James Foley, one of the U.S. hostages killed by ISIS, were critical about the way that they felt like they were shut out by the U.S. government. We also heard the president recently in that address mentioning the fact that family members felt threatened. Even though that was the law, the president made sure to point out that no one had ever been prosecuted. The president says they will not pay ransoms. They will not agree to any concessions with these terrorist organizations, but they will help them communicate with the families. So let's bring back in our roundtable, if we still have them with us, Tim Constantine and former Deputy Staff Secretary David Goodfriend. Apparently, this is definitely a direct response to some of the criticism David, that the Obama administration received after James Foley's death here. Do you think this will change anything in terms of the way this moves forward?
I do. I think, the type of document that the president has alluded to here, the kind of policy directive that he's issued, has real effect and real teeth within the administration. When I was Deputy Staff Secretary, we were in charge of assembling and getting executed the policy directives and executive orders and other presidential documents. And the people that report into the White House and the agencies, they really do live by the letter of these things. I think also the spirit of this directive is to rather humanize the what can otherwise be a very cold and white-knuckled experience, all around. And I think it is in response to Americans' experiences. I think the president, if I had to sort of characterize what he's doing here, he's trying to streamline and improve interdepartmental communication, and he's trying to humanize the experience that none of us hope to have, but that American families have had when the government is trying to secure the return of their loved ones, and they too want to be active participants or at least be kept apprised of what's going on.
Right, and Tim, this also,
so I think it's good.
I think this also represents a new reality that we're dealing with today.
Well, I think the first portion of what the president talked about and what David just encapsulated is great. The idea that they're going to try to streamline the process, the idea they're going to communicate better with the families, that the government, that our government is going to work more closely with the families. Absolutely, that's great. I think the part the president didn't mention or certainly didn't make clear was they are now going to allow and actually help facilitate hostage negotiations between the family and whomever has taken the hostages. And when you say, will this policy change make any difference? I think what difference it will make is it will encourage the taking of more hostages.
Well, part of the problem here, David, is that these other countries, France, other European countries, they pay these ransoms. They negotiate directly with these terrorists, and so maybe more French or more citizens from other countries will be taken hostage. Do you think what Tim said is accurate? Is this going to change the dynamic?
Well, I would add to that list China. There are plenty of countries that will buckle, fold like a pup tent the minute one of their citizens is taken hostage. And I think the United States has been very wise not to adopt that policy. And, Israel certainly has always said we will never negotiate with terrorists, and I think that's out of necessity. And I think in our case, only time will tell. I mean, I have to be honest here. Only time will tell. We don't know what the result will be. I can only pray that it's not going to result in some sort of open season. And I think the president has the benefit of top secret information that he's been able to glean from his national security apparatus. I find it very hard to believe that if he was being advised that this change will somehow put more Americans at risk, that he would go forward with it. I think he's been advised that the changes will not have a material effect on the number or severity of hostages taken. Therefore, I have to trust that's the case. Now, as I said, only time will tell. And I'm sure that if we see some sort of spike or change or worsening of the situation, we'll see changes to this policy,
all right,
but we only will know over time.
Tim, last word to you. About a minute left to go. Clearly, President Obama was impacted deeply by those pleas from these hostage family members.
Oh, anybody would be. You're not human if you don't see the pain and anguish. As a parent, I can't imagine if someone took my little boy and he had, you know, no ability to return to the United States, no ability to live his life. I can't think of a more painful experience. I just think the overall policy, and there's a secondary question here, is it's not just a policy. Federal law actually says you cannot provide monetary or material support to terrorist organizations, and the Justice Department and the administration is now saying with this policy we're going to ignore federal law. They do it with the drug laws, they do it with the immigration laws. Now we're going to do it with this law. That's the bigger problem for me.
All right, well, fair enough. We'll leave it there, gentlemen. Tim Constantine, thanks so much for being with us. Also, David Goodfriend, always good to get you guys' insight on some of these issues, and appreciate you weighing in on this presidential press conference just a few moments ago. So you have it, President Obama outlining some changes that the U.S. is going to make to its current hostage situation for Americans being held abroad by hostile organizations. Much more to come here on Newsmax Now. Stick around.